From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Ticats Today with Steve Milton.
It's Sunday, May 26th. This is Ticats Today, and I'm Steve Milton. We're going to go a trifle longer today as we dissect Saturday's first live tackling and blocking action of the year. We'll learn how Bo Levi Mitchell felt under center. We'll point out how a very promising Ticat rookie receiver dealt with some personal embarrassment and then an ensuing form of redemption. And we'll hear Scott Milanovich's strong reaction to a flurry of unnecessary penalties by the Hamilton special teams. First, Ticats yesterday. Ottawa Redblacks 31, Hamilton Tiger-Cats 22. Another home loss for a team for whom one of the off-season recurring themes has been pledging to resurrect Tim Hortons Field's forbidding mystique. Now, Bo Levi Mitchell and Scott Milanovich both said they wish they could have captured the game because athletes are out there trying to win. But Saturday was an exhibition game, which doesn't count in any official standings. Priorities are less about scoreboard totals than about extracting usable knowledge about individual and team strengths and, more importantly, weaknesses and holes. So a loss in an exhibition game, actually like any loss, can become a win long term if it leads to successful corrective actions and overall improvement. So we'll give the Cats a scoreboard mulligan on this one, but we'll definitely revisit it once the home games are worth 2 real points in the race for a CFL playoff spot. Now, given that context, unless you're a coach, it's tough to get a full read, even a partial read on a CFL preseason game. Both teams, are trying to zero in on certain things, such as discovering which players should make the final roster because they show promise on special teams. So, for instance, a few times the Tiger Cats punted or kicked field goals when in a regular season game they might have gone for it. And because the Red Blacks had the same mindset, that helped the Ticats gauge parts of their return game, and they found some things that they liked. But Bo Levi Mitchell said he also appreciated one real game situation of leaving his offense in there for 1 3rd and 5, and pointed out that making of it eventually led to a touchdown. That's a good building block for them. Mitchell and the potential offensive starters were in the game until late in the first half, maybe 2-3 minutes to go. He found pace in the second quarter and completed 10 of his 16 passes overall for 139 yards and a touchdown, but numbers weren't all he and Milanovich were looking for. It was about making the correct decisions, putting the ball on the right shoulder of the receivers, meaning the correct shoulder, whether that ball was caught or not, delivering it with the right arm action, meaning the correct arm action, and more pressingly, the right footwork structure. Both men mentioned that there were 2 or 3 throws and reads Mitchell would like back, but they were fairly satisfied with their initial impression on that. And Mitchell talked a little bit what it was like to return to live hitting. We had some technical problems, so I'm going to have to read what Bo Levi Mitchell said. Quote, "It felt amazing. It felt good to be back out there. Obviously, you'd like different results. I got to play a little bit more than I did in the first game last year and got a chance to put some drives together. Saw a lot of players out there, and I know they were all being evaluated who made good plays. We got to clean up some things. I thought we had a sharp process, looked good, focused. Reads I'd like to have back, a couple of them, but for first time out, I felt pretty good." Now, 3 quarterbacks played in this game. Mitchell, followed by number 2 Taylor Powell, who was 7 for 14 and 68 yards, and also ran 15 yards impressively, almost into the end zone. And number 3 Kevin Thompson had some action against the deepest Ottawa reserves and showed he's a running threat. Thompson and rookie Harrison Frost will decide their battle for the number 3 quarterback's job against the Argos next Saturday in Guelph, when most Ticat starters won't play a lot. There's a couple of downside items here. There was some miscommunication with receivers and routes. While individually and collectively, there were too many drop passes, which Milanovich postulated, and I agree with him on this one, hasn't really been a problem in training camp so far. Now, one of those drops was by 6'4" Shemar Bridges, who was penciled in. I'd say it's closer to inked in now, at the outside receiver spot on the short side of the field where the league's best shutdown defensive backs lurk. He ran a perfect short corner pattern right in front of the east stands and had nothing but empty touchdown acreage in front of him. Mitchell then delivered a pinpoint pitch, but Bridges dropped it. But here's a perfect example of what we talked about just a few minutes earlier in this podcast. Things which cost you points in an exhibition game can have a longer-term positive impact. Several plays later, in this case, Mitchell found Bridges on a similar kind of pattern on the other side of the field, and the big alumnus of Fort Valley State squeezed it and powered it in for a touchdown. His confidence, which could have been shattered, was instead buoyed. He had a tough lesson in his first pro game, but he learned from it. Now, again, quoting Mitchell, and again, because we have sound problems, I'm going to have to read it. He said, Mitchell recalled a game last year. He said, I think I did the same thing in the first game. McGriff had a drop last year on a deep ball in the first play in the preseason. And on the very next pass, I went right back to him. Now, I don't look to go back to a guy. This is Mitchell talking. I'm not trying to build his confidence back up right away. What I care about is moving the ball. I'm not going to sit here and hold anything against a guy who dropped the ball. These guys are pros. There's going to be times I'm missing passes, and if they're coming up to me and yelling at me for that, we're not going to get along very well. Shemar is an amazing receiver. Everyone has a job. He'll get past that. Bridges was one of a number of receivers under the critical microscope, although one of them wasn't Tim White. We know what he can do. He just seems to be getting better and better. And when I do my TSN Top 50 CFL Players ballot later in the day, I'm going to slot him way up there. Top 5 for sure. 3 targets, 3 receptions with space cleared by his fellow receivers. As for Bridges, the Ticats saw a couple of obviously positive things about him yesterday, although, like everyone else, the smaller details will emerge in film analysis today. First, he responded emotionally and physically well to his next chance after that embarrassing missed catch, and here was another test he passed. On his first live hitting pro reception, he was absolutely smoked by a Redblacks defender, but he held onto the ball and sprung back to his feet quickly. Now here's his reaction to the drop and to the touchdown.
It does a lot for my confidence. I think first, speaking for myself, I think a couple of years ago, I would have let that really drown me. That's not something I usually do. I was worried about going upfield. I was wide open. So for me to go to the sideline first, to have my coaches and teammates to all uplift me and say, hey, you're going to get another one. And then just telling myself, all right, just the maturity. I'm gonna be all right. And then my coach calling the play and both throwing me the ball. That means a lot to me. Just the confidence they have in me and the confidence I'm instilling in myself that was really good for myself. And I think that was a blessing experiencing that in my first game to take me on for the rest of the year.
That whole sequence was a positive sign, as was the play of the A defense, which got after but did not sack Ottawa starting quarterback Drew Brown, who didn't play a ton because the Redblacks have a week 1 bye. The Hamilton run game didn't get much yardage, but it's clear the team is committed to it, and it was really good to see that. And remember, James Butler hasn't played yet. Mark Leggio was good on all 3 field goal attempts. Rookie defensive lineman Teron Mason, who's in tough to crack the deepest part of the team, had some very strong moments in the middles. And safety Robert Panabaker, who's had a good camp, continued that with a reverberating fill-the-gap hit on an Ottawa receiver that looked eerily similar to the way that safety, number 1 safety, Stavros Katsantonis, does things. And there were some good returns. One by Lawrence Woods III for 54 yards, which unfortunately was called back for a hold. But it was followed immediately, and I mean immediately, by a 31-yarder by Kalon Geiger through the same gap. So something was working right on the blocking schemes on the punt returns. That said, Milanovic is showing that he's not afraid to point out what irks him. And the nullified Woods return was part of something larger, which did irk him on special teams.
It felt fun right up into the point where we took about 5 penalties on special teams in the first quarter. So a lot to coach off of. I told the players, the coaches in there, you're either coaching it or you're allowing it to happen, and it's not going to be allowed to happen. And guys are going to be evaluated on special teams as well as offense and defense. And, special teams generally in preseason games is a little bit of a nightmare with that many people, but that was unacceptable. What happens when you haven't played in a while, in a year or however long these guys haven't played, is they lose their discipline, they lose their technique and their fundamentals when they get out there in the game. I would expect to see an improvement.
There were some other negatives, and there always are, and some which stood out were, of course, the 5 or 6 drops, the 125 yards and penalties, not all on special teams either. Failure to pick up an inside blitz, which allowed an easy strip sack on Taylor Powell, a perfect Powell throw into the end zone that Hamilton native Jacob Patton had, but then dropped as he whirled, some mental miscues by a few defensive backs, including starting corner Mark Milton, and a basically uncontested 91-yard sprint for a touchdown by deadly Ottawa returner Devontae Dedmon off a Corey Vedvik punt, which needed to be a few feet closer to the sidelines. Now, swinging it back to the positives, what I'm about to talk about was a good thing technically, but it's also easy on the eyes and should be entertaining this year. The Ticats are trying to turn up the metronome of their offensive rhythm and dramatically increase the number of offensive plays. And to that end, they went with essentially a no-huddle offense from the very first play. Now, they won't get any argument on that from any of the quarterbacks, as Mitchell emphasized. And again, I'm going to just have to quote him verbatim myself. So he said, "I love it." He was in a no-huddle all the way through college at SMU, playing under former Ticat coach June Jones. And he says, it's great to have Scott Milanovich committed to it. And he says, a guy who has a like mind when it comes to that concept. Monday, it's back to the power practice grind of week 3 at McMaster, and we'll pick it up from there. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. And for more in-depth coverage of training camp, please go to ticats.ca/training camp. Rinse and repeat. ticats.ca/training camp.
This has been Ticats Today with Steve Milton. Catch it on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.